Zach, welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to talk to you today. If we could start off just by sort of laying a groundwork for our discussion. As I just mentioned to you before, we had some technical difficulties. I know a little
Sure.
bit about ayahuasca. I have no personal experience with it. I'm certainly very interested, but I know a
Mhm.
lot of people listening to this will have no idea what the hell ayahuasca is, where it comes from. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure. It's first off, it comes from the Amazon basin, South America, and it's used by both indigenous peoples and also the mestizo culture in that area. Mestizo being mixed European and indigenous in terms of blood and cultural background. It is essentially a tea made of the ayahuasca vine and quite often the chacruna leaf, the ayahuasca vine being the MAOI inhibitor and the chacruna leaf being DMT. And when we combine the two in a tea, it allows the DMT to be absorbed into the body via the gut. If we didn't have that MAOI component and we took some DMT orally, it would just, the body would just break it down and nothing would happen. That's why when you hear about people smoking DMT, it's smoke, or also in the book DMT, Spirit Molecule, the research was done doing intravenous DMT. And so that combination allows the DMT to be absorbed, and it also spreads the experience out over 8-10 hours versus like a 10-minute experience with just straight DMT when you smoke it.
And what is the history of this substance and its use for, medicinal purposes?
Sure. So recently it was found in a quote unquote medicine bag that was dated like 5,000 years old. It was found in this bag along with, I think it was wachuma, which is a cactus, and coca leaves. So we can conceivably date it back 5,000 years as being used by indigenous peoples in South America. And it's used. The West has really been impressed with its ability to help with particularly psychological issues, depression, anxiety, particularly with our Western disease, as I like to call it, because we all have a certain level of stress and anxiety that I don't think we've seen in society before, and ayahuasca is particularly helpful for that. There can be some healing vis-a-vis ayahuasca on a physical level, but I don't generally point to that because we don't have any consistency around that, no studies and so forth. So oftentimes it's used to help with psychological issues, and then also was used as a diagnostic tool. So the shaman would take ayahuasca and look at the patient energetically and then gain information such that they could prescribe other plants for that patient based on what they saw. And then at the end of that treatment, use it again to see if the work was done or if they need to do more work with other plants and so forth. In addition, it more recently, with the development of Santo Daime Church and the União de Vegetal, both out of Brazil, it's become a sacrament. And we can talk a little bit about, I think, the way La Familia Ayahuasca, my retreat center operates. We look at it as going from a medicine to a sacrament. The medicine being, ayahuasca is very good at cleaning out energetic blockages, and again, addressing things like depression, anxiety, and so forth, which are often associated with energetic blockages. And we're getting a little esoteric, of course, but once that cleaning is done or has reached a certain base level, then we can look at ayahuasca as more of a sacrament, a connection to the divine, and using it as a way to learn more about ourselves, about our connections with other people, or about connections with the world from a large, or universe from a larger standpoint. It sounds very cut and dry, medicine and sacrament, but it weaves in and out of that, because we as humans, we say we do ayahuasca, do a series of ayahuasca ceremonies, and we're like, wow, I feel totally open and connected and clean and all this sort of thing. Lighter is the word that is often used. Then we go back into our Western world and we get bombarded with the same old stuff. Even, we can mitigate this through practices like meditation, qigong, float tanks, all these wonderful practices that we encourage as part of integration post ayahuasca. But we still oftentimes just get bombarded by stuff that clogs us up, for lack of a better term. And so then ayahuasca is good to go back to and re-clean and reconnect and get back into it as a sacrament.
Just briefly, you just used the word blockages. And I was listening to another podcast in which you used that word and talking about these energetic blockages. I'm familiar with people talking about chakras and, cleansing your chakras and stuff like that. I mean, what does that mean to you, an energetic blockage, just in your own terms, your own idea of it?
Well, one way to look at it is that as we go through life and experience our daily traumas or our past traumas, particularly past traumas that we've been holding on to for a long time and haven't really, we might have worked through them from an intellectual standpoint. But what happens is we actually, if we can use the concept of a tube, like with the concepts around the meridians in Chinese medicine, or nadis in the yogic systems or Ayurvedic systems, there are these tubes of energy. And when we go through some sort of trauma, they get kinked up. We actually tense up, and they get smaller. And then when there's kind of either the tube is too small or has been tensed up too tightly, sometimes completely closed, then you got a bunch of energy trying to move through, gets stuck, and starts to, for lack of a better term, putrefy. And that can often lead to usually starts with some sort of psychological dis-ease, not disease, eventually lead to psychological disease, and then can possibly lead to physical disease as well, as we have all this tension throughout our energetic system. And that can also translate into the physical, right? And so what ayahuasca is really good at is opening that up. And that's what it's much more somatic than, say, mushrooms or LSD, as she's really pounding or pushing through those energetic tubes to open them up. And that's, once they pop open, then things start to flow as they should and things balance out. And this is the same concept that we have in Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, is we want to balance. We want to get the energetic system flowing and moving as it should. And the same thing works if you want to look at the central channel in the chakra system. She's working on that as well. In fact, my wife and to a certain extent myself believe that, certain extent, I do believe that ayahuasca is Kundalini energy and is opening and popping up. In fact, the reason I brought up my wife is she oftentimes will, like in ceremony, you'll see her spine just do this shaking thing as the Kundalini energy is rising up. In fact, she does that now outside of ceremony as the Kundalini continues to want to move upward.
Just briefly, you're using the female pronoun she when you describe ayahuasca. Why?
Well, that's the way she shows up from an entity standpoint. She is we talk about her as a feminine entity, as a mother, as a grandmother, and our interactions with her are very much like that, and in unconditional love. However, the funny thing is we forget that a parent who has unconditional love for her children will be loving And at times when it's necessary for you to do your homework, you got to sit the fuck down and do your homework. And that's where some of the challenging stuff happens with ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is like, hey, you got to look at this trauma that you went through, this thing that you did, or this habit that you have. We got to address this, and it can be addressed in a very linear, logical message. Oh, ayahuasca told me to do X, Y, or Z. Or it can be done in this subconscious, more somatic message that it just doesn't make any sense. But later in life, we're out in the world and we interact with someone in a very different way, and in a much more positive way. So when we say she or grandmother or mother ayahuasca, it's because of this this feminine aspect. And she also, the experience itself is very feminine in the sense that it comes in waves, very wavy, like this, right? You'll be like totally, well, what we say is in the medicine. Then suddenly it's like, oh, wait a second, I feel pretty sober. Oh shit, here it comes again. Right. And which is another feminine aspect. Now there are some traditions, for example, the Kofan in Colombia, who approach ayahuasca as a masculine entity, and I haven't experienced that directly, but that's my understanding. And back to the masculine, feminine, they're in this plant medicine world. If you talk to some Native American church people about peyote is a grandfather, a male medicine. And it's interesting because the experience with peyote and wachuma is the Peruvian version of, it's also a mescaline cactus. And what happens is that you have a very steady entrance to the experience, and then you hit a level and you are stable at that level for hours and hours and hours. And so it's very stable, not wavy. And again, more of a masculine experience, if you will. It's not male female, but rather that masculine being firm, the Shiva Shakti kind of thing. Yeah. Shiva is the solid center, and then Shakti is moving around. Right?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, just laying my cards on the table, I think the main reason I wanted to talk to you today, and I definitely want to get more into ayahuasca itself and your work, your retreat center, and all the rest. But my interest was particularly piqued when I found out that you come from a background in finance. Oh, and yeah. I think anyone who's got this far in the podcast already is probably saying, well, what? Like, he's talking about Kundalini energy, like all this stuff. And my ex-girlfriend works in finance. And so I'm definitely not a part of that world. I have a little bit of exposure to that world. And what exposure I do have, it was, I can't imagine a lot of people in that world making some of the decisions that you've made. So I'd like to talk a little bit about your story. And as I talk to you today in the middle of, a random place in Guatemala, I mean, how did you get there? I mean, and I'd like to know a little bit about your early life and your work in finance and what led you here.
Yeah. I worked in finance for about 10 years. I was an institutional stockbroker. So as a stockbroker who worked with hedge funds and mutual funds as my client, I wasn't working with wealthy individuals. I wasn't calling up grandma and saying, hey, why don't you buy a mutual fund? I was working with the hedge funds. And it was great. It was very intellectually stimulating, worked with some really smart people. I loved it for the first, 3 years or something. And then as time went on, found myself really, really dissatisfied. And I didn't realize it at the point, but I was I was depressed and anxious, and I did not know why. I had everything, all the boxes were checked for happiness in America. I traveled a lot. I had a nice condo. I had a nice car, all of these things, and I wasn't happy. And I was using I would drink a lot, and I would self-medicate with, my drug of choice would be marijuana to kind of numb things out. And I just hit a point where I was like, shit, I gotta do something about this. And then I started kind of doing these weekend workshops, things like Landmark Forum and various NLP kind of workshops.
And where were you living at that time?
I was in Boston when at the peak of my depression, and Boston itself was difficult for me because I'm not from Boston. And for those who don't know, Boston is very insular, or was at the time, and hard to break in socially, particularly since I didn't like sports. And so I came across a article in National Geographic that where the author described her experience with ayahuasca, and she came from a background of journalism, and she was also working with depression and also PTSD, because I think she had gone through some hot spots in her journalism career and needed to work through some stuff. And it sounded like it was very challenging and at the same time rewarding. And as soon as I read that article, I was like, okay, I gotta go do that. And it took some time to get down to Peru and attend a retreat, but I was able to, and did a 5-ceremony retreat with what's called a shamanic dieta included in that. And at the end of the retreat, I was like, wow, this is amazing. I've worked through a lot of relationship issues, a lot of issues around my step parent, and just felt much more open, connected, cleaner, all these things that we hear regarding ayahuasca experience.
Could you just paint a little bit more fuller picture of that first retreat? I mean, what did it involve? What were you doing? What was it like?
It was pretty straightforward. It was, I want to say 8 days. It might have been 8 days, and then we had 5 ceremonies. I don't remember the exact schedule in terms of which.
When you say ceremonies, what do you mean?
Oh, ayahuasca ceremonies. Sorry,
yeah.
5 ayahuasca ceremonies, and those ceremonies tended to start at 7:30 or so, run until midnight, 1 o'clock, and then you're still feeling the medicine after ceremony's over a little bit, and you hang out with people and talk and so forth. There was not a huge amount of integration work done at this retreat in terms of, it kind of differs from our retreat. Every time we have an ayahuasca ceremony, the next morning we get together and we talk about it. It's really important, we think, from an integration standpoint, to kind of share the experience. And also there are always questions as to like, how, particularly the first time, or even the first several times, how is the medicine working? That's one of the things when you choose an ayahuasca retreat center, is someone needs to be there, the facilitator or the maestro or shaman. Their experience is invaluable, because we as facilitators have seen so many ayahuasca ceremonies. I'm up 1,200 or more in my career. And so there are these patterns, these cycles that we see that are somewhat consistent, such that when people say, oh, I'm going through X, Y, or Z, you're like, oh, yep, we've seen this before. And, this is fine. This is normal. Help reassure people, particularly if they're having a tough time. So there wasn't a lot of that going on at this particular retreat. But nonetheless, it was very productive from my standpoint. It was also a retreat that had like 30 people on it, which is different from what we do. We max out at 15 so that we can provide a high level of personal attention and really take care of people.
So after this retreat, what happens? Do you go back to Boston and change your life, or does it take time?
It actually, I'm trying to get my timeline. I actually ended up in Portland at a new job, a brand new job in 2009, which was right after the financial crisis in 2008. So it was the hardest time to find a new job in finance ever. And I just did it. And I was like, wow, this is, and I attribute that largely to ayahuasca. It sounds odd, but I feel it is true. I suddenly started to enjoy my job more. And just, I enjoyed people more, and I felt much more connected, and, just everything was flowing much better. I didn't think that I was going to go back to ayahuasca. And, for time reasons. And 6 months later, I was back down in Peru, did another retreat. And it's at that point that I decided to have ayahuasca in my life more. And then 3 months after that, I quit my job, moved to Peru, and the environment that I was in was so toxic for me that it wasn't lasting. It wasn't a magic bullet fix for the rest of my life. It definitely made some very long-term shifts, and part of that shift was realizing that working in finance was not for me. This is not going to happen to everyone who works, in a professional job and drinks ayahuasca. They're not going to quit their job. But for me personally, I was just like, oh shit, this is not for me. And so ended up moving back to Peru, or moving down to Peru full time in 2010. And with the idea of doing personal work. I had no desire to become a shaman, no desire to become a maestro or anything like that. The idea was to do about 6 months of really heavy duty shamanic dietas, which is another practice. It's a foundational practice with ayahuasca, and then ayahuasca itself. And about a month in, I met my teacher, and we just became really close. And about 5 months in, we decided to build a camp outside of the village, Genaro Herrera, and that's when we opened La Familia Medicina, which is different than our current La Familia Ayahuasca.
Going back to, I know I'm always saying going back, but I'm interested to know more. I mean, so when you made that decision to move to Peru, it's about 10 years ago. So you're what, around 40, pushing 40, something like that?
Yeah, I was 39, 40, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, take me through that decision. That must have been, pretty difficult, because you've invested so much of your life and, going down a certain path. I mean, was it something you really agonized over, or were you pretty clear that this is what you really needed to do?
Yeah, I totally agonized over it. I mean, I was, like I said, quote unquote, living the American dream. And I was lucky I was single, so I didn't have a family to worry about. And again, I was just like, I can't take this anymore. I'm not happy. And so it's funny. I went through this lie to myself where I said, oh, you know what? I enjoyed teaching English when I was younger. I taught English in Mexico for a period of time, and that was a great job. So maybe what I'll do is I'll quit this and I'll go to Peru for a retreat, and then I'll go to Asia and teach English and just see what happens, kind of thing. And that was the story. And that was the story to kind of appease my professional friends and also my family. And then one morning I woke up, I was like, no, I'm just going to go to Peru and just bang out a bunch of shamanic dietas and do a bunch of ayahuasca, do a bunch of personal work, and then see what happens. Of course, life had a different plan for me.
So then following up from there, take me how you become a shaman and doing the work you do now. I mean, how did you get there?
Yeah, it's tough, and it takes a lot of time. And this is something that is frustrating to see, particularly now around the world. As ayahuasca spreads around the world, we have a bunch of facilitators with very little training and very little understanding, because understanding comes through experience, right? It's but that aside, yeah, I mean, in our lineage, we focus very much on what's called the dieta, or the shamanic dieta, wherein we're actually doing work with a tree or plant that is not ayahuasca, forming a strong energetic and spiritual relationship with that tree or plant that also has its own medicine, right? So every tree and plant has its own medicine. And we're doing this thing called the dieta, which is a very strict practice wherein you don't go to deal with the outside world. You're eating very specific foods. You're not engaging in any technology, just essentially removing as many distractions such as food, entertainment from food, or entertainment from chatting with someone else, and really removing all those distractions and focusing inward on oneself and the connection with this tree or plant that you're doing the shamanic dieta with. And what it is it's a purification process, and it's a relationship forming with this other spirit, this plant spirit, and it's also building up one's energetic protection or shield, if you will. And so the idea is you do a bunch of these dietas, and you go into an ayahuasca ceremony, and then you have all these spirit friends, these allies that you have formed. They're actually a part of you now, and that provides the facilitator with stability in the ceremony. So you're not like getting knocked around by ayahuasca like everyone else is. And it's also allows us to call in that energy or that spirit of that tree or that plant to come in and help out. In fact, the ayahuasca will tell us in ayahuasca ceremony, say, hey, you need to sing redwood right now. You need to sing the Icaro, the song for the redwood tree, or you need to sing the oak tree, or you need to sing Ayauma tree right now. And because that medicine is carried through the song to the person, and ayahuasca has opened up the energetic body such that that medicine can be delivered. The songs are essentially an energetic medicine delivery system. The dieta is a way for us to charge or put a pharmacy in our energetic body as a facilitator. And so in the jungle, when you ask to learn or study the medicine, they say, okay, it's dieta, dieta, dieta. They don't say ayahuasca, ayahuasca, ayahuasca. So it's a bunch of these dietas and a bunch of ayahuasca ceremonies. So before I was allowed to even do small ceremonies on my own, I had done at least 24 dietas, which are at least a week long. And I was probably up around 400 ceremonies. I'm guesstimating at this point. This kind of work when I was training was very, very, very front end loaded. I would just do dieta after dieta after dieta, ceremony after ceremony after ceremony. And as time has gone on, it's become less and less and less. It's just not sustainable to go at that rate that we do in the beginning. And it's interesting, as an aside, gringos, we have a really distinct advantage over the Peruvians or the South Americans in terms of the study. Because we can go down, we have a chunk of money, and we can go down and really just bang out all these dietas and all these ceremonies. Whereas a local Peruvian, it takes a lot longer because they have a family. And you cannot work while you're doing a dieta. You can't be doing ceremony every single night when you got a family to go take care of. I mean, these people are living subsistence life, and they're farmers, they're fishermen, they can't afford to take a week off, let alone, for me, I didn't do anything else for 4.5 years. That's all I did was just dieta, ayahuasca. And for myself, and also with bringing in people to work with myself and my teacher. So it's intense. It's hard. I don't recommend it for anyone. But there are plenty of people who are going down, doing a couple months in Peru, and then returning home and putting on ceremonies, which is unfortunate.
Those early years in Peru, I mean, did you ever have moments where you thought, what the hell am I doing? Like, I just want to go home.
Yeah. I've wanted to quit many, many times. I mean, it's just that, it is physically, emotionally, and spiritually unlike anything else I've ever tried. I've done things like Vipassana, 10-day Vipassana retreats, I've done 2 of those, and they're really, really hard. So imagine doing, I guess it's like being a monk. Imagine doing that all the time, so it's just really challenging.
What kept you going?
I don't, every time I've tried to quit, things have lined up such that the medicine's like, no, you're still going. You're still going. As one works with ayahuasca and does these dietas, there's a communication that happens directly between oneself and ayahuasca, and oneself and the plants and trees. And the channels are open to have a dialogue, if you will. And, been like situations where I decided to leave my camp in mid 2014 and go off on my own. And I was like, go solo, right? This is time to do my own thing. And I was like, well, I don't know if I'm going to continue doing ayahuasca. I don't have my camp and so forth. And then suddenly, bam, medicine landed in my lap. People were like, okay, let's do ceremony. And I was like, okay, here we go. And it's just time and time again, whenever I've wanted to quit, it's like, nope, you're going to continue going.
And what about the, I don't know if you called it low level or not, but it sounded like you were describing something like low level depression that you've been experiencing in the United States for years. I mean, what happened to that? Are you still struggling with that on a daily basis, or over the years has that kind of dissipated, or what?
Yeah, it's still, so one of the things I realized is particularly through my practice, my Buddhist practice, is that we're going to have ups and we're going to have downs. And on in those challenging times, it's the whole idea of getting rid of that is actually suffering in itself, but rather, how do you deal with it? How do you accept? How do you flow and accept the wisdom that can come from feeling low? And so I would say that those still have my down moments, but I recognize them. I'm aware of them. And it's just much easier to deal with, and I know they're going to pass. So I would point to, and this is something that we at La Familia Ayahuasca, I think, bring to the table, and we're not the only ones, but the melding or the merging of Eastern philosophies such as Buddhism with the medicine, because they really complement each other in a wonderful way. And so I would say through both ayahuasca and through a regular meditation practice, yes, I still have my tough days. Yes, I still get pissed off. Yes, I still have my challenges in life in general. However, dealing with them, the triggers are shorter in expression, and then the low points are also shorter in duration, but they're still there. I mean, it's the idea that this is something people really need to be aware of when they look at ayahuasca. It's not a magic bullet. There still needs to be work done. I have a therapist, for God's sake, and my wife and I go to therapy, and bringing that in with ayahuasca is fucking amazing. Fucking amazing. So this West, East, South American bringing together of all these modalities is absolutely, it's like a rocket ship in terms of personal development, I think.
Just, I was also curious about this. I mean, just ballpark figure, how many times do you think you've ingested ayahuasca in your life?
Ballpark, somewhere between 1,200 and 1,500. Again, most of that in the early days. I mean, when we first opened our retreat center in Peru, we would have people show up on Monday, have them stay until Sunday, and every morning we'd wake up and say, hey, do you want to drink ayahuasca? And then invariably it'd be like we'd be drinking ayahuasca every night. Drop them off for 6 nights, drop them off at the boat on Sunday, have a night off, then have another small group, and this was a great way to learn because it was a lot of ayahuasca in a very short period of time, and just building the number of people we were working with. And so I did that for like 4 to 6 months, and then we were like, oh, wait a second, let's stop just letting people come whenever they want. Let's set a schedule. And then it was like every 2 weeks we'd have a 5 ceremony retreat, and then we'd still be drinking in between, because I think on average I was drinking particularly while I was in the jungle, like 3 or 4 times a week.
Wow.
Just because it was just I had a lot of energy. It was there. Everybody in the family that I was working with, my teachers were like, yeah, let's do it. They had a lot of energy, and they loved ayahuasca too. And it was just, really, for lack of a better term, balls to the wall for a long time.
I realize this is really, really tough to put into words. I was listening to another interview you gave, and you used the word ineffable. And I totally get that. But if you could try to sort of explain what ayahuasca, even just speaking personally, like what it's given to you, what are those experiences like? I realize they're often very different. But why keep going back to that substance?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So for me personally, it has definitely opened my heart, opened my connections to other people, to the divine. It's really inspired me on the broader spiritual path beyond ayahuasca. I'm not one of the people who believe that it's all about ayahuasca. I think that bringing ayahuasca together with other practices is absolutely key. And so, relationships I actually have good friends now. I didn't have good friends. I realized looking back, I didn't have good friends. I'm actually happy in the world in general. I'm less, I still can be a bit bitchy at times, no question, but I'm less so. And so these are the big shifts. And also in terms of the, practices outside of ayahuasca, meditation practices and other practices, like a turbo booster. I now can have, not that we want to avoid, like in Buddhism, we want to avoid being attached to the experience, but at the same time, I go into meditation and there are these amazing experiences that I didn't have before. They're enjoyable, and I understand I need to drop that from a Buddhist standpoint. But yeah, so those are the things that have helped me. And it's really, really important for people to understand that ayahuasca, as a facilitator of ayahuasca, I want you to, if you come work with us, at some point, I want you to fire us. And fire us for the best reasons possible. That is, you've done enough, worked through enough stuff to kind of stop relying on ayahuasca and start relying on your practices that you have developed with the help of ayahuasca. Or just if you happen to be lucky enough not to need those, not everyone needs practices. That's a tiny minority, but awesome. Now, I get calls from people that I've been working with for years, and they're like, they're kind of embarrassed. And I don't think I want to do ayahuasca anymore. I'm like, awesome. Don't stop. There's no reason to use ayahuasca as a crutch. It is a tool to help you increase your consciousness and work through trauma and all of these things. But it's not an end all be all. And for some people it can be not an end all be all, but it can be a sacrament that they choose. All right, I'm going to take this ayahuasca path. I'm going to use ayahuasca as a sacrament, and the sacrament is this connection to the divine, and that's a different path, right? And that's along the lines of what the Santo Daime Church and the União de Vegetal, which are two Brazilian churches that are Catholic, and they drink ayahuasca as their sacrament, as part of their mass, so to speak. So there can be that in this the shamanic path as well. For me personally, there was a point where I was like, okay, I've kind of hit a spiritual plateau from an ayahuasca standpoint. And I don't mean to can sound a little bit arrogant. And I'm still learning things from ayahuasca. Don't get me wrong. But the progression is really steep in the beginning, and then it starts to level out in terms of your progression with ayahuasca. In terms of learning and consciousness expansion, right? And a good friend of mine down in Peru pointed, another gringo friend who was also studying to be a shaman, he's like, look, there's at some point where you're like, okay, the plant medicine incrementally is not that, the utility curve has started to flatten out. Is not, so it's a point at which you decide, am I going to just stop, maybe go back every once in a while, or am I going to serve this for the rest of my life? And so that's a point where that has come forth for me, and I'm until further notice, I'm going to continue this work for, I can't say forever or for the rest of my life, because I don't know, but that's a sense I have. Did that answer your question?
It does, yeah. But a follow-up question. So you know that one of my big interests is love and relationships. You were talking about how you have better friends now, and you're describing some of the personal changes you've had. You've also mentioned that you're married now. Congratulations. How do you think ayahuasca, or has ayahuasca changed your sort of romantic, relationships, or your relationship? How do you think that it's impacted that?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's something through ayahuasca. Everyone comes out the other side feeling much more connected and much more compassionate and loving towards others. So when we have that openness, vulnerability, and feeling of connection and trust to a certain extent, it makes relationships a lot easier to deal with, or to work with, or to enjoy. All of the above. However, it's interesting. When I was doing my training, part of the training through the shamanic dieta is no sex, like for 20, 30 days at a time, every time we do a dieta. So when I was doing my training, I really didn't have any relationships, and I had some, but nothing long lasting or significant, because I was so focused on the training. And it was interesting when I met my wife, having to, after being essentially alone for 5.5, 6 years through my training, 4.5 years in Peru, and then continue on my own outside of Peru, and I met my wife. And so it was still a challenge to kind of figure out that relationship, being with somebody after being single for so long. In terms of relationships, I think that, like, say, a couple who wants to go to an ayahuasca retreat together, it's great. Ayahuasca is an amplifier, such that we can see our own stuff in an amplified way. So that's a blessing and a curse, right? It can amplify ego. It can amplify, if we're not careful. It can amplify narcissism if we're not careful. It can amplify love for each other. And that's the ideal. So if we have a couple who go to a retreat together, who have a healthy relationship, of course, everyone has their arguments and problems, but have a general healthy relationship, it can really bring forth appreciation for the other person and amplify that love and so forth. Conversely, I don't think it's a great tool to have two people who are in conflict go to an ayahuasca retreat, because it may amplify in that retreat context those problems, and just really just create some big conflict in that environment. So in that kind of situation, it might be useful for them to go separately, so that it can amplify the issues at hand, and then they can work with it. That's the amplification is such that we can work with it. Now, whether we do or not, therein lies the pitfall of ayahuasca, right?
I see.
There are pitfalls in ayahuasca, without question.
Yeah, well, I think, and again, I have no direct experience with it, but I know some people who have, and it's certainly becoming more and more popular, you might say trendy in certain circles. And it seems to me like, your whole energy and the way I've heard you speak about it, it seems to me you have a deep respect for the plant. And I think a lot of people in this space don't. So I think, I think that's an important point to make. And the fact that you're right, it's probably not for everyone, right? Like, needless to say, if you have some serious mental issues you're going through, or mental illness, it's probably not a good idea, right?
No, yeah. And like I said, that's why when we have people who want to come work with us, we have a vetting process where we have an application, and then most importantly is we have a Zoom call like we're having right now, so that we can look each other in the eye. Is this person stable? Are they sincere? Do we like each other? This is such, can we form some trust? Because working with ayahuasca, if you're going to drink with somebody, you better have a pretty decent level of a trust in them. And the only way I know how to do that is relating to each other, starting face to face. And through that, then, there's a relaxation opening, and then we can get some serious work done, right? If we don't like each other, if we don't trust each other, it's not going to work, or it's not going to work very well at best.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So you're the facilitator of the experience, and you ingest ayahuasca along with the people who are customers, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, we call them guests, but
thank you. That's perfect.
Or in Peru, they call them pasajeros, which is passenger.
I like that better. That's very good.
Yeah. So yes, it's really important for the facilitator to, and the facilitators are my wife and myself. We sometimes have students with us as well. Yeah, it's important for us to do so, to ingest, because like if you remember, I was explaining how ayahuasca was and is used as a diagnostic tool. So we're looking around and we're seeing what needs to happen. We're also, ayahuasca opens the doors of perception or connection with those plants that we were dieting. Remember the shamanic dieta? And ayahuasca is telling us what to sing and when. And then through that song, the Icaro, the medicine song, we are delivering that specific medicine from that other tree or plant, not just ayahuasca. And so it's important for us to have those doors of perception and communication open with ayahuasca in the experience. Now, people constantly tell us, how do you do that? I mean, they're plastered to the floor, they can barely move, and they're like, how are you standing up or sitting up there and singing for 5 hours at a time? And if someone needs help, you're able to get up and help them. And it's ayahuasca as an entity. When you change roles, she changes how she uses you. When you're a pasajero or you're a guest, she's working on you to heal you. When you become a facilitator, she changes that, such as she's using us as a delivery mechanism. So she will use us like an instrument, telling us what to sing and when. And she'll also, it's amazing, I'll be sitting in ceremony completely like, oh my God, I'll be singing an Icaro. Oh my God, I hope no one needs any help because I can't move. There's no fucking way. Then I hear help, and then ayahuasca lifts everything and I go help them.
Wow.
And it's just like, what? Okay, yeah. And this is a very consistent experience for
very
myself.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, I'm definitely intrigued to learn more after this discussion. I'm sure I'm not the only one. What's the best place people could find you on the web?
Yeah, so our website, simple, is ayahuascafamily.com. We also have our own podcast. There seems to be a dearth of really deep conversation about ayahuasca. There's a lot of talk about experiences and so forth. So we're on iTunes and Stitcher at just search Ayahuasca Family, and we'll come up. But yeah, the main way is ayahuascafamily.com. And our email, if you want to just email us, it's info@ayahuascafamily.com. And
you're offering retreats about once a month, is that right?
About once a month, 8 times a year. We work around Lake Atitlan has a rainy season. And so we, like our next retreat here is in October. We took September, most of October off for the rainy season. And then May, June is also rainy. So about 8 times a year, we offer once a month retreats here on Lake Atitlan, Guatemala. Lake Atitlan is amazing. I mean, it's like San Diego weather, not too hot, not too cold, sunny. It's this lake that's surrounded by volcanoes, really amazing energy, for lack of a better term, and starting to get some serious attention particularly on the backpacker circuit.
Great. Well, Zach, this was a real pleasure, and I want to thank you for your time and thank you for the work that you're doing. And yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, likewise. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Humans in Love. If you'd like to learn more about my guests, my work, or you'd like to listen to back episodes of the podcast, please visit humansinlove.com. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Humans in Love using your podcast app of choice. If you're a fan of Humans in Love, and you'd like to help keep the show going and help me spread the word, please take 30 seconds out of your day to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast app of choice. Before I let you go, remember that life is short, so let's make it count. And thank you, as always, for your listenership and support. I'll talk to you again very soon.